Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wa salatu wa salamu alayhi Muhammad Rasulul Kareem. Assalamu alaikum. I'm not going to talk on a narrow subject which is listed in the program, which is how the Muslim community can gain exposure in the Western media. It's very easy to do that. Osama bin Laden has done a great job. Robert Spencer has done a great job. Twice his crew have said that I should be beheaded for what I say, which I presume is an honor. The problem is that to get attention in the media, you have to do something bad, because for the media, bad news is good news. As a matter of fact, the best way to get attention is to go into politics, commit a crime, and then write a book about it. You get rich. So this is not the way we want to get exposure in the media, good exposure in the media. So I want to talk instead a much broader approach, which probably encompasses, I hope, inshallah, all the talks in this conference, which is changing the perception of Islam in the West, rehabilitating the essence and the practice of religion. Because it's not just a problem for Muslims, it's a problem for people of all faiths. There is a challenge to faith in general. So I have 4 questions leading up to addressing the media issue. The first one is, what is the future of faith and religion? In a secular world, many people ask whether there is a future for faith and religion. One should distinguish between the two. Faith is belief in the unseen and transcendent reality in the ghaiba. This is part of human nature and has provided purpose to human life since the first appearance of sentient life on earth. Faith is universal and eternal and therefore has a future, and faith is the essence of religion. Religion is the response to faith in both individual and community life. Religion is the pursuit of knowledge about higher truth and the translation of knowledge into moral practice. There are many religious paths in the search for absolute truth, and there are many forms of practice, but all are designed for the same purpose, which is to worship the absolute, whether we call it God or Got or Dios or Allah, in thought, word, and deed. Allah tells us in Surah Al-Ma'idah 5:48, "Unto every one of you have we appointed a different governing system of law, shira, and a different way of life, minhaj. If Allah had so willed, all humanity would have been a single community. God's plan is to test you in what each of you has received in both scriptures and inspiration. So strive as in a race in all virtues. The goal of all people is to God." Put differently, the future of faith and religion is the difference between essence and appearance. Many scholars distinguish between Christianity as essence and Christendom as what one sees, the practice. Christianity is both a faith and a system of practice, whereas Christendom may differ radically from Christianity itself. The same is true of Islam and Islamdom. Some scholars about 30 years ago started distinguishing the two by talking about Christendom and Islamdom, because the faith and the practice in various empires didn't mesh. I recently wrote a 77-page chapter on the spread of Islam for the 2-volume book that was just mentioned, textbook, Islam and Muslims. And I found that the faith of Islam spread most rapidly when the Muslim empires were weak, and slowly when they were strong. They spread most successfully in places like Indonesia, where there were no Muslim empires and where the rulers actually opposed the spread of Islam. The reason may have been that Islamdom often was un-Islamic, just as it is in many places today. Islam as a faith is spreading in America today precisely because it faces so many obstacles, just as it did 1444 years ago when the angel Gabriel first revealed to Muhammad ﷺ that he was to be a prophet and a messenger of Allah. So the second question is, what is the core of the essence of Islam? The future of Islam is up to Allah, but the future of Muslims is up to every person through one's observance of the first two essentials in the universal Islamic creed. These two, known as taqwa and adl, are the core of the essence of Islam as a religion. They're the first two of the five of the Aqidah of the Shia, and they're supported also by the Sunnis. Taqwa is loving awe of Allah in response to Allah's love of every person. Taqwa is also submission to Allah as a source of truth, love, and justice. Adl is love of compassionate justice as a framework for expressing our love for each other. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ emphasized the importance of seeking truth and justice, but he posited the motivation for the search in the constant Quranic emphasis on love, as developed in a book I published just last January, The Natural Law of Compassionate Justice and Islamic Perspective. The favorite prayer of Prophet Muhammad and of Imam Ali alayhi salam, and of millions of Muslims ever afterwards, was Allahumma as'aluka hubbaka wa hubba man yuhibbuka wa hubba kulli a'mali yukaribuni ila hubbika. O Allah, I ask you for your love and for the love of those who love you and for the love of everything that can bring me closer to your love. Islam is known as the religion of peace, salam, which comes from submission to the only being worthy of human submission, namely Allah, God. In classical Islamic thought, as developed from the 3rd through the 6th Islamic centuries, peace as the essence of Islam results from justice, and justice is merely the expression of truth. The most profound verse in the Quran as a source of faith-based justice is Surah Al-An'am 6:115. Tamat kalimatu rabbika sidqan wa adlan. The message of your Lord is completed and perfected in truth and in justice. This teaches that justice is an expression of truth, and that truth originates in the transcendent order of reality, indeed from the being of God, not in man-made law. Perhaps the second most profound verse is Surah Al-Shura 42:17, which emphasizes the concept of balance, known as mizan. Ayatollah Tabatabai wrote a 5-volume set just called Mizan, which I read many, many years ago. This is central to all classical Islamic thought in every aspect of both personal and social life. It is God who has bestowed, again, this is Surah Shura, it is Allah who has bestowed revelation from on high, setting forth the truth, and thus given man a balance wherewith to weigh right and wrong. This verse of the Quran teaches that divine revelation through the various prophets in human history is considered to be a balance, an instrument placed by God in our hands by which we can weigh all issues of conscience. A third profound teaching of the Quran is the importance and power of choice, of which the most important instance is freedom of religion and the freedom to interpret the divine guidance in the practice of justice. The concept of choice is central because without freedom to choose, neither balance nor justice would have any meaning. The power to choose between good and bad is the greatest gift from the Creator to the created, but is also a profound test for every community and nation, every civilization, and humanity itself. The Quran emphasizes the importance of the basic power to choose between purposes or higher paradigms of thought, which is the focus of my talk, because the choice shapes the governing agendas of both persons and communities and therefore controls action. According to the Quran, the choice that has determined the rise and fall of entire civilizations throughout human history is between the pursuit of transcendent justice and the pursuit of material power as an ultimate goal in life. The balance to be maintained in every civilization, as embodied in every world religion, is among order, justice, and freedom. This paradigm of balance teaches that order, justice, and freedom are interdependent. When freedom is construed to be independent of justice, there can be no justice, and the result will be anarchy. When order is thought to be possible without justice, there will be no order, because injustice is the principal cause of disorder. When justice is thought to be possible without order and freedom, then the pursuit of order, justice, and freedom are snares of the ignorant. This is also basic to all the teachings of the American founders, which is identical to the essence of the Quran. Another major point of my talk. Without consensus in the proper nature of order and of justice and freedom as essential parts of a single whole, rather than as independent pursuits, no civilization can continue to exist. The twin roles of religion in all its traditionalist manifestations, including the monotheistic and revealed religions, and especially Islam, are the spiritual well-being or happiness of every person and the maintenance of consensus on the responsibilities and rights necessary to live in an ordered society. The students of comparative legal systems differ on whether there is an essence to any particular religion and to any given legal system. My specialty is comparative legal systems. So I'm quite interested in comparing whether there is an essence to them. Some other scholars say each religion is an accumulation of human practices, and therefore every legal system is a composite of accidentals developed in response to changing exigencies. Some Muslims themselves are saying that we need to reform Islam because there is no essence of Islam. That's what people say it is. So instead of reforming people, I want to reform Islam, which is, well, it's very modern, put it that way. Islam is by far the best example of a religion that has very self-consciously developed a sense of its own essence and sharply distinguished this from any perverted interpretation and practice by self-professed Muslims, whether they're arch-conservative or arch-liberal, it doesn't make any difference, because they lack mizan. Whereas in Christianity, the essence is considered to be love. In Islam, the essence is considered to be justice as a derivative of love. So the third question, how does one apply the essence of Islam in normative jurisprudence? Jafar al-Sadiq was really the founder of this whole approach of normative jurisprudence. Well, actually, Ali salam was the founder with the Prophet Muhammad, because the Prophet Muhammad would gather the Sahaba together and pose questions, both real questions and hypothetical questions, and say, what is your decision? What's the right answer? And then he would say, I really am not interested in your answer. I want to know how you developed it. What principles did you use? And Imam Ali derived everything from principles. That was his whole approach, and it's been followed more or less ever since. Sometimes this approach is forgotten. It's been practically dead for 600 years, except in Persia, where it has continued. But it is now being revived, alhamdulillah. In Western positive law, which by definition is entirely man-made, law exists only to the extent that it's enforced. In Islam, if the law is to be enforced, it's failed, because the purpose of Islamic law is primarily educational, as a set of guidelines for action. What are these guidelines? Some of the best minds in human history developed this set of guidelines over a period of many centuries. And incidentally, there's a whole library of books that have just been published and translated over the last 10 to 15 years. These guidelines are known as the Maqasid al-Sharia, or purposes of the Sharia, or as the Kulliyat, or general principles, or as the Dururiyat, or essentials. Very briefly, these may be categorized as the following 8. I'm almost finished with a book which gives one lengthy chapter on each one of the 8. So what are they? The first is Haq al-Din, freedom of religion. The second is Haq al-Nafs, respect for the human person and human life. And then Haq al-Nasl, the respect for marriage and human community. Haq al-Mahid, respect for the physical environment. Haq al-Mal, respect for the universal right to ownership of productive property through broadly, and nowadays through broadly owned capital. Haq al-Hurriya, respect for the universal right of self-determination or political freedom. Haq al-Karama, respect for human dignity, especially gender equity. And Haq al-Ilm, respect for the rights to free speech, publication, and association. These were developed by literally hundreds of books, and in conjunction with Jews and Christians in Andalusia. And today also, they're working together on this. For more than 3 decades, ever since I first encountered the normative law of the Sharia as a set of human responsibilities and rights, I consider that these norms or guidelines constitute the essence of Islamic jurisprudence. They provide a sophisticated methodology for understanding the Quran and evaluating the Hadith and the Sirah, so that the rules and regulations or ahkam can be applied justly. Because without their purpose, the application of rules and regulations can promote injustice. Recently, however, I've come to the conclusion, let me see, how much time do I have? 20 minutes? Oh, great, okay. Recently, I've come to the conclusion that there are 2 essences, one formative and the other derivative, that they must be maintained in a dialectical balance, as is everything in the universe, the positive and negative electrons, throughout human existence. There's diversity and there's a dialectical balance. Husband and wife, for example. That's part of the natural law. I was thinking of human rights as the intellectual essence, but this is an essential derivative of a prior essence, which is love, both hub and ishq, coming from beyond the human intellect. In systems terminology, there's an input-output balance. The input is transcendent, known as the batin, and the output is immanent, known as the zahir. This is similar to the dialectic in all of creation, but especially between the theory and practice of law. In the intellectual processing, the theory should influence the practice, but the practice should also influence the theory. In Islamic jurisprudence and in Islamic thought generally, the theory comes from the transcendent source of divine guidance, as best human beings can understand it in the open-ended search for truth. But this understanding must also reflect the experience of practice in a changing space-time universe. The essence is indeed unchanging, but its application is or should be in constant flux, because that is the nature of reality. The controversial question then arises, is there really a difference between thought and law? Since law is the basic framework of reference in Islamic thought, whereas in Western positivist thinking, the positivist paradigm, human thought is the framework for law. And law is whatever anybody wants it to be. 51% majority wants it to be a certain way, and that's it. This is not true in Islam or in any religion. One might look at this new perspective on the Sharia by using the analogy of the hourglass. The Sharia is like an hourglass which transmutes the transcendent into the immanent by means of the art of intellectual processing. This processing from input to output is what Allah in the Quran refers to as the jihad al-kabir, or great jihad, which is the intellectual jihad and the only jihad mentioned in the Quran in Surah Al-Furqan 25-52, وَجَهِدْهُمْ بِهِ جَهَادًا كَبِيرًا. Struggle with it, divine revelation, in a great jihad. The other two, the jihad al-akbar and the jihad al-saghir, al-asghar, are mentioned only in the hadith. The Sharia would have 2 essences, the input of love and the output of human rights. Without eternal input, there will never be any lasting output, since, as Rumi puts it, love is the reason for the creation of the universe. Quite simply, who would care about justice unless one were motivated by love? This, of course, would explain why in recent times justice has gone out of style. President Bush never mentioned it, except Saddam Hussein will experience American justice. But in the Islamic concept, it was just another universe for him. In all of this, we should remember the wisdom of the throne verse, Ayat al-Kursi 255. يَعْلَمُ مَا بَيْنَ أَيْدِيهِمْ وَمَا خَلْفَهُمْ وَلَا يُحِيطُونَ بِشَيْءٍ مِنْ عِلْمِهِ إِلَّا بِمَا شَاءَ. He knows all that lies open before men and all that is hidden from them, whereas they cannot attain to any of his knowledge except what he wills them to attain. So the fourth question, and really not the question, it's more of an answer. Can Muslims change the perception of Islam through a grand strategy of paradigm management? Perception of Islam in America can be changed only if Muslims think big through what I call paradigm management, and only if the paradigm to be managed is American. The policy making in America consists of balancing special interests in the pursuit of power. But this balancing takes place in pursuit of agendas formed largely in the think tanks and in the media. These agendas, in turn, are shaped by paradigms formed primarily in academia. Muslims usually start at the wrong end of the policy process, usually by lobbying against something after the policies have been set and can no longer be changed. The two opposite poles of paradigmatic management are power and justice. The neocons exemplified the power paradigm, whereby everything was measured in terms of the unilateral imposition of American power, mainly military, to prevent chaos in the world. This approach is based on fear and on reaction to real or perceived threats to global stability. The opposite paradigm is justice, which is best exemplified by President Barack Obama, though he cannot escape the power of those whose only goal is power. A year ago in Cairo, President Obama gave a remarkable speech despite the firm resistance of practically everyone in his administration. He had to bulldoze his way to even mention the word justice in the first major policy address, his first major policy address to the world. 6 times the speechwriters took the word justice out of the carefully managed speech, but each time he put it back in. When he read the final version of the speech on the flight to Cairo, he found that again the word justice had been deleted. So without prior clearance, he put it back in spades by using the word justice 7 times. A week ago, on May 22nd, at the West Point graduation ceremonies, he issued another revolutionary call for justice as the framework for American policy, both domestic and foreign. Although he focused on the role of the military, it was proper at West Point, he made it clear that, quote, "we will be stronger if the world is just." And he spoke of quote, an international order of liberty and justice. Perhaps he's concluded that he must introduce a new paradigm before he can move the ship of state to follow up through action. The paradigm of justice calls for pursuing justice as the route to order, and not the other way around. The justice paradigm warns that it attempts boldly to impose order, produce only more disorder, and make justice impossible. The day before yesterday, President Obama released a 52-page national security strategy paper as required by Congress, in which he reiterated several times the main points of his West Point address. Because this is not just the president speaking, but the administration. He pointedly rejected George W. Bush's focus on counterterrorism as the organizing principle of security policy. He pointedly avoided the use of the word Islamic anywhere in this 52-page paper, and stated that, quote, "efforts to counter violent extremism are only one element of our strategic environment and cannot define America's engagement with the world," end quote. In his personal introduction to the document, President Obama wrote that, quote, "our long-term security will come not from our ability to instill fear in other peoples, but through our capacity to speak to their hopes." The document on its first page noted that in recent times, quote, "inequality and economic instability have intensified as threats to the universal aspiration for freedom and dignity." He called for renewing American leadership through moral example, and stated that, quote, "the most effective way for the United States of America to promote our values is to live them." President Obama's first formal national security report called for the pursuit of, quote, "enlightened self-interest through, quote, an international order based on rights and responsibilities." Most significantly for me, as interested in Islamic economics in general, he stated, "we recognize economic opportunity as a human right." I would say this can be accomplished only by removing the barriers to broaden capital ownership. That's another talk. President Obama emphasized throughout his first national security report the importance of never compromising American values in the pursuit of security. And I quote him. He says, "Our engagement will underpin a just and sustainable order just because it advances mutual interests, protects the rights of all, and holds accountable those who refuse to meet their responsibilities. Sustainable because it is based on broadly shared norms and fosters collective action to address common challenges." These broadly shared norms are, I hope he has learned through his experience around the world. He didn't find them at Harvard Law School, unfortunately. Muslims can change the perception of Islam in the West, first of all, by addressing the goal of so-called grand strategy, which is to manage the paradigms of thought that shape history. Muslims by heritage are well equipped to shape paradigmatic thought because historically, Muslims have developed justice into a framework ideally suited for the modern world, even though Islamdom often has not practiced it any better than has any other civilization. Secondly, Muslims can change their perception of Islam by helping to renew America. Lobbying for Muslim interests will not spread better understanding of Islam, even though such lobbying is necessary. I might tell when Congressman, what is his name? He was head of the Foreign Relations Committee. He asked me if there were a Muslim think tank, I asked him if there were a Muslim think tank, would anybody in the government listen to it, pay any attention? His eyes lit up, and he said, every day, at least 2 or 3 times in either the executive branch or the legislative branch, I encounter problems that concern Muslims. I've never seen a Muslim there. And I said, if there were, would you listen? And he said, if there were, I would beat down your doors under 2 conditions. Number 1, you have the same expertise that everybody else has. And number 2, you address what's good for America, not what's good for Muslims. Of course, they're the same. But he said, we're interested in America. You're interested in yourself. You will have a place at the table when you're interested in the issues that concern everybody. And of course, that's an ideal invitation for Islam and Muslims. Lobbying for Muslim interests will not spread better understanding of Islam, even though such lobbying is necessary. Policymakers and their advisors will listen to Muslims only if Muslims can contribute to pursuing what is best for America's enlightened interests. They can best do so by working with the visionary American leaders like President Obama to carry out their visions. We can change the perception of Islam, and indeed of all religions, only by rehabilitating the essence and practice of religion, not as the cause of injustice, but as the only cure. In politics, visionary leaders can overcome the seemingly insuperable obstacles and barriers of special interest only if and to the extent that Muslims, Christians, and Jews and others cooperate in solidarity to turn the essential vision of all religions into reality. Insha'Allah. Assalamu alaikum.